Greetings teachers and panelists, I'm Ethan Lee from 10C, and this is my presentation on the results of my research about LGBT representation in children's film and television. When I was younger, and even up until now, I've always loved watching the animated kids show Steven Universe, a show which is as much about finding yourself and accepting others as it is about colorful intergalactic space rocks trying to take over Earth. Now, during the first season finale, one of these space rocks exploded the entire fan base. Or, to be exact, two of these space rocks, because they revealed for the first time that Garnet, one of the show's main supporting characters, was actually a fusion of two different characters, Ruby and Sapphire. My tremendous shock aside, at first I only saw these two characters as close friends, but it soon became more clear that the fusion between them meant something more. So I thought to myself, okay, this is normal. Sapphire's a girl and Ruby's a guy, and they love each other. Except Ruby wasn't a guy. She was a girl. And after a few more seasons and a little too much research, even my child self could no longer deny that Steven Universe was boldly proclaiming, yeah, this is an intimate romantic relationship between two female characters, so what? And just so you know, this is a show primarily directed at 6 to 11-year-olds. As the show proceeded, they became more and more confident and explicit in showing these messages, and as my eyes were opened to the LGBT representation in Steven Universe, I slowly started recognizing how more kids' shows also started including LGBT themes. While the concept of LGBT has been around since the dawn of civilization, it's only in the last few decades that much of society has started accepting and supporting it more. And I have personally experienced how this has started to appear even in the media directed towards children. Which led me to a burning question. How does LGBT representation in children's and teenagers' film and television impact those children? In my research, I hypothesized that such representation, if shown correctly, would empower children and enable them to develop a wider, non-discriminatory view of LGBT. Now, in order to determine the impact of representation on children, it would make sense to study the children themselves that are or have recently been exposed to that media. So I designed a survey using Google Forms to find out how people felt towards representation as kids, as well as their opinions on LGBT-related issues. The results will be taken from a total sample of 52 respondents, most of whom are upper schoolers from Chayabangsa Classical School. First, we need to truly understand the demographic of this sample. My survey identifies several factors that could affect the responses of the sample. First of all, most of them are 14 to 16 years old, which is within my target audience, since it's probably easier for teens and preteens to remember what they watched as kids. Although I would have preferred a broader age range, it's because I didn't have enough connections to reach out to other people, and so most of the audience is those around my age. Next, most of the respondents are either male or female, with there being an relatively even mix between the two, which also makes sense since the transgender or gender non-conforming people are a minority in the community. And obviously, a very large portion of the respondents are heterosexual, showing again how LGBT people are a minority. With this information, we can conclude that the majority of the respondents are straight, binary mid-teenagers. Now that we've gotten to know our sample a little, we can get into the meat and potatoes of the analysis, the actual reactions and views of people towards representation in children's media. In my survey, I asked them a few questions. First, I asked them, as a child or teenager, how often did or do you watch children's movies and television shows? They answered on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being never and 5 being always. And as you can see, most of them answered 3 and 4. This shows how kids' shows and movies are a pretty big part of their entertainment, and we can probably expect the mindsets of many people to be at least partially shaped by what they watched as kids. Next, I asked, how often did or do you notice LGBT representation in that media? And while the results of this question are obviously more spread out than the others, you can see that the responses never, rarely, and sometimes make up the majority. Most children don't seem to recognize LGBT too often. This could be because many media companies are afraid of explicitly showing representation since, as we know, it's very controversial. And then I asked, how did you feel and react towards LGBT representation? Now, in this survey, in the survey, I gave 5 different possible reactions to seeing LGBT. And the respondents could say that they felt them either extremely, very, moderately, considerably, a little, or not at all. The first reaction was that representation made them confused. The second was that it seemed normal and even beautiful. The third was that it was repulsive, disgusting. The fourth was that it was not important. And the fifth reaction towards representation was that it was relatable and empowering. Now, as you can see from this graph, it's obvious that most respondents answered not at all, as the blue bars are the largest in all of the reactions, except the reaction that says it doesn't seem too important. A good show is a good show. It seems like most kids probably don't feel much towards representation, although if you look at it more closely, this could be because most of the respondents are straight. Now, here are a few more noticeable things about this graph. A little more people saw LGBT in kids shows as beautiful. As you can see, the bar for those who thought it was extremely beautiful is a little higher than the others. Although most of the respondents who answered this were not straight. Next, in the next reaction, half of the respondents were pretty disgusted with LGBT representation, as the bars in the disgusted reaction are a little higher than the others as well. This could be a result of the social stigma against LGBT community in real life. Now for the next reaction, this one's pretty interesting because unlike the other reactions here, the not at all answer is actually lower, and a lot of people either considerably or moderately thought that representation wasn't that important. The answers for this reaction were also least affected by the respondents' gender and sexuality. And finally, the last reaction is where you can see the most respondents answered not at all. Very little of them obviously related to LGBT, though again, it's probably because most of them are straight. So after asking for their reactions towards the LGBT, I asked a few essay questions in my survey. I asked the respondents what their opinions on LGBT were. Now, more people said that LGBT is caused by nurture, things like traumatic events, rather than those that said LGBT was natural. And these presumptions help them determine if they think it's morally correct or not. The number of people that agree with LGBT is roughly equal to those that say it isn't morally correct, although those that say it isn't correct are mostly CPCS students. And we do need to know that there are a few people that explicitly say their extreme like or dislike for LGBT. They just say, we should all be gay, or gay is gross, without giving any further explanation. And also, a large portion of both pro and contra LGBT both emphasize how the minority people themselves should still be loved and respected as human beings. Next, I asked them, do you think children under 13 years old should be exposed to representation in the current children's media? Now, most LGBT respondents claim that it was fine. LGBT obviously isn't as taboo for them as it is for others, and they argue how it wouldn't actually harm children. On the other side of the argument, most straight people argue how it would lead children astray, and that children would want to find more information without proper guidance. Several people mention how the parents should guide and educate their children alongside, regarding LGBT, whether fully or partially alongside the media. And finally, quite a large number of them said that LGBT representation could raise awareness of the communities in reality. And for my final essay question, I asked on their thoughts on the benefits of LGBT in children's media and how it could benefit children and how it could benefit like that. Now, about half of the responses agree that representation should be implemented at least partially. A few people clarified that it would be best for kids above 13 years old, as they would be able to understand it better. They say that proper representation should be positive, fair, and non-discriminatory, so it could help give kids a realistic and unbiased perspective of LGBT in real life. Now, the more pro-LGBT side says that representation can help kids discover their sexuality, while according to some of the more contra-LGBT, it could show kids actually how bad LGBT is. Several people still say that this representation could lead kids into LGBT. But despite all of that, there are still many people who disagree with the representation itself, but still believe that it would benefit the LGBT community itself. Now, to conclude, it appears that LGBT in kids shows could at the very least be potentially beneficial for children and teenagers. It could give them a realistic reflection of the LGBT in reality, but there are a few terms and conditions. For one, representation has to be positive and unbiased. It cannot be too vague or ambiguous, and LGBT parties need to tie in with the story. This could help get rid of the discrimination against LGBT by giving kids more objective perspective. Above all, the representation's purpose has to be mainly for educating kids, not blatantly glorifying LGBT. It should paint a picture of reality, not try to convince you if that picture is good or bad. Creators also need to make sure that it is suitable for kids. They shouldn't try to explain things that are too complicated for children, and it's also probably better to reserve these things for older children that are more mature. Now, also, we need to be aware that it isn't just children watching kids shows. The whole world will be watching, ready to erupt in a backlash at the slightest inappropriate detail. If these survey results have told us anything, if these heavily divided survey results have told us anything, it's that many different people will respond differently towards representation. Because of that, it has to stay culturally sensitive and not disrespect anyone's beliefs. Finally, lots of people especially fear the risk of LGBT misleading children. So it would be best for parents to guide their children through the representation. And most kids don't seem to be affected by representation by that graph I showed earlier, so it shouldn't be the most prioritized way of educating them anyways. And with these points, hopefully the representation's benefits could be maximized. However, we need to be aware that currently, most shows don't follow these terms and conditions, so they can still be misleading and we still have to be careful. To close, I would like to show a graph of one more question from my survey. I asked, how were you first introduced to LGBT issues and with whom did you discuss them the most? Out of all the sources that introduced children to LGBT, friends and the internet made up around 50%, the entertainment media about 25%, parents less than 20%, teachers less than 10%. Friends and the internet obviously aren't the best source for a kid to learn about LGBT. They can be misleading and the child could end up in all sorts of negative behavior. Which is why we should make use of the next most influential source, entertainment media. Kids shows need to be shown in the right way in order to equip them with the right values and the right perspective. Of course, that doesn't mean we're just throwing parents and teachers out the window. Friends and the internet should decrease and parents and teachers should increase, on the contrary. It's best, as I said before, it's best for entertainment media to be supplemental to the guidance that kids should already get from their own parents. This is especially important because children are at the age where they are the most impressionable. Whatever they see, whatever they hear, whatever they're told, it will all greatly affect how they define the very world they live in. Because of that, we must not lead them astray. Thank you for listening.